Hey everyone, what's going on? Diablo 3 Season 29 is right around the corner, and one of the cool new builds is the updated Angry Chicken Witch Doctor. I'm going to go through everything that I've been testing on the PTR. So just to get into it, we're going to be using Monojuma's Carving Knife and Monojuma's Gory Fetch. This is what's been changed to make this build a lot better this season. So Angry Chicken explosion damage is increased by 2000%, Angry Chicken lasts 15 seconds, and movement speed is increased by an additional 100%. You absolutely fly when using Angry Chicken with these two items. Then you get 75% damage reduction, which is absolutely huge. The bonuses last while you are a chicken and for 5 seconds after. And then while you're an angry chicken, you spawn a chicken every half seconds that seeks enemies and deals 100% of your angry chicken explosion damage. Then we're going to be using 5 pieces of Arakir's claws. This lets you summon a spider queen, which is basically useless. And then the spider queen leaves behind a web that lasts for 15 seconds. And you take 75% damage reduction while in the web and for 4 seconds after. And the really big thing is the 6th set, which is the damage of your creature skills is increased by 25,000%, and that includes Hex, which is our main damage dealer. 25,000% is just wild. I can't believe they balanced the game in this manner. For our jewelry, we're going to be wanting a Squirt's necklace. Using Ring of Emptiness, your non-fetish pets deal 279% increased damage to enemies affected by either your Haunt or Locust Swarm. And then Convention of Elements, which is basically mandatory. Bracers, we're using Lokumba's Ornament, which is a damage reduction item, 60% if you have Soul Harvest, at least 1 stack, an additional 2% for each stack of Soul Harvest. So base Soul Harvest can get 5 stacks, so it's 70% damage reduction. And then right now I'm using Captain Crimson's belt and pants. There's also the option to use Guardians, which is going to switch your bracer slot, and you're going to have gloves open because you're now going to be wearing the pants for Arakirs. I kind of like the Captain Crimsons, but there's some flexibility there, and there's obviously going to be some testing and learning that can be done once the season starts. Then for the legendary gems, right now I'm using Bane of the Powerful, which is going to be swapped with Bane of the Stricken if you get to higher GRs. Bane of the Trapped, mandatory for this build. You're going to be running up onto guys and popping the Hex Explosion, dealing a ton of damage. And then just for some survivability, I'm using Exoteric Alteration right now. Argument to be made maybe for trying out Enforcer to get some extra pet damage. For Kanai's Cube, we have Cluckeye. This is the other thing that was changed that makes this build a lot better this season. Casting Hex Angry Chicken turns all your pets into exploding chickens. Chickens deal 200% increased damage, and Angry Chicken deals 50% more damage per exploded chicken. So that's another huge damage multiplier. I'm using Mask of Jerem. Pets deal 200% increased damage. And then Ring of Royal Grandeur to make it so I only have to use 5 pieces of Arakirs and 2 pieces of Captain Crimson's or Guardians. For the skills, I'm using Piranha's Piranado, Hex, Angry Chicken, mandatory for the build. Piranado helps you deal some extra damage because affected enemies take 15% increased damage, so it's really good for like an elite pack or a Rift Guardian. I'm using Spirit Walk Severance as a way to get around when you're not in that Hex cycle. Soul Harvest, like we talked about with the bracers, you get a huge increase in damage reduction. You also get a ton of intelligence, which is going to matter a lot this season. And I'm using Languish, which increases your armor by 10% per harvested enemy and reduces their movement speed, which is not super important. Horrify, Frightening Aspect for the 50% additional armor and some defensive ability. And then Locust Swarm to trigger the ring. And I'm using the Pestilence rune to make it jump to additional enemies. For our passives, we're going with Tribal Rights, which it gives you a 25% cooldown reduction on Hex. I want to be able to use Hex as much as possible. Circle of Life, when an enemy dies within 20 yards, there's a 15% chance to summon a zombie dog. And the reason we're using that is because when you cast Hex, it turns all of your pets into angry chickens, so it's just some extra damage. Zombie Handler, your life and that of your zombie dogs increased by 20. And again, you can have an additional zombie dog, which is nice. And then Midnight Feast, damage of your zombie dogs and Dark Gargantuan is increased by 50%, and you can have an additional zombie dog. This one I'm not so sure about, but there's so many passives that work for this build. Like you could justify switching to Creeping Death. You could justify running Spirit Vessel. You could justify Pierce the Veil. So yeah, there's just a ton of options with the passive. And again, it's going to take some testing to just figure out what's the actual best setup for those core passives. For the actual gems in your gear, right now I am using a diamond, but I'm not sure how much you need the full cooldown. I do like having piranhas available. I like the ability to cast Hex whenever I want. I don't really want that to ever be on cooldown because that is such a huge damage reduction, again, with a 75% damage reduction on this two-piece set. You could maybe test out an Amethyst, but again, I think the diamond's going to be the way to go. In your gear, you're going to want topazes for the extra damage, and because you're not going to be able to get all that intelligence from Paragon points this season, I think you're going to want these. You could try out diamonds, and you could also try out rubies for the armor. Speaking of Paragon points, this is totally different this season. I'm pumping everything into intelligence under core. On offense, everything into critical hit chance at the moment. I think there might be some justification for splitting critical hit chance and critical hit damage. Defense, everything into armor because we get a bunch of resists anyway. And utility, everything into area damage because when we do the Hex ability and we pop the explosion, we want that to go as far as we can, hit as many enemies as we can. That's going to be it for this build guide. Let me know, are you interested in playing this build in Season 29? If you like the video, please press that like button, please subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.